Evelyn Crow stood over the dying rancher she'd dragged 3 miles through a Wyoming blizzard, wolves circling just beyond the firelight, and realized the town that had mocked her for being too small, too weak, too eastern, was about to watch her fail in the most spectacular way possible. One wrong move and 6 orphan children would bury their father beside their mother. The storm wouldn't stop. The wolves were getting closer, and the woman everyone said would run at the first sign of trouble had nowhere left to run. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The train lurched to a stop with the kind of grinding metal shriek that suggested it might never move again. Evelyn Crow pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window and stared at what the conductor had generously called a town. Blackstone Ridge, Wyoming looked like something God had started building and then forgot about halfway through. A dozen wooden structures leaned against each other, like drunk men after last call. Snow fell in heavy, wet clumps that turned the single dirt road into something between mud and concrete. 3 horses stood tied to a hitching post, their breath rising in clouds, looking about as enthusiastic to be there as Evelyn felt. She picked up her carpet bag. The thing had survived Boston, survived the cramped boarding house in Philadelphia, where she'd spent 6 miserable months after Thomas died, survived 3 different trains that had carried her progressively further from anything resembling civilization. The bag's floral pattern had faded to something approximating the color of old dishwater. Her entire life fit inside it now. The cookbook sat on top, tied with kitchen twine because the spine had given up months ago. Her mother's recipe for brown bread. Thomas's favorite apple pandowdy. Instructions for keeping sourdough starter alive through hot summers. All of it useless now, probably. You couldn't bake your way out of grief, no matter how hard you tried. Evelyn knew because she'd tried. Blackstone Ridge, the conductor called, like anyone on this train had any doubt where they'd ended up. Watch your step, ma'am. It's slippery. She stepped down onto the platform, a word that dignified what was essentially 3 warped boards nailed across some rocks, and immediately understood why he'd warned her. Her boot hit a patch of ice hidden under fresh snow, and she grabbed the train's handrail to keep from falling on her ass in front of the whole town. Not that there was much of a town to witness it. A man in a heavy coat stood near the station house, smoking. 2 women hurried past with their shawls pulled tight, throwing Evelyn the kind of quick, assessing glances women gave each other in small towns. She'd seen those looks before. They were measuring her, finding her wanting, too thin, too pale, too city. The train pulled away behind her with another metallic scream, and suddenly Blackstone Ridge felt very quiet, very empty. Very far from anywhere she could run to if this turned out to be a mistake, which it probably was. "Mrs. Crow?" She turned. The man who'd spoken stood about 10 feet away, hat in his hands, looking at her like she was a package he'd ordered that had arrived in the wrong size. Boone Mercer. Had to be. He was taller than she'd expected from his letters, which had been brief to the point of rudeness. Broad shoulders, dark beard going gray at the edges, eyes the color of creek water in winter, cold and not quite clear. He wore work clothes that had seen better days and boots that had seen better years. "Mr. Mercer," Evelyn said. They stared at each other. The snow kept falling. Somewhere a dog barked. "You're smaller than I thought you'd be," Boone said finally. "Not hello, not welcome to Blackstone Ridge, not even, how was your journey? You're smaller than I thought you'd be." Evelyn had spent 3 weeks on trains thinking about what she'd say when she met him. She'd rehearsed polite greetings, practiced smiling, prepared cheerful observations about the landscape. None of it came out. "Well," she said, "you're exactly as warm as your letters suggested." Something flickered across his face. Might have been surprise. Might have been annoyance. Hard to tell with men who looked like they'd forgotten how to use facial expressions somewhere around 1875. "Wagons this way," he said. He picked up her carpet bag before she could object, not gently, just efficiently, like he was loading supplies, and started walking. Evelyn stood there for a moment, watching him go, wondering if she should just get back on the train when it came through tomorrow. But there was no tomorrow train. "Once a week," the conductor had said. "You came to Blackstone Ridge and you stayed in Blackstone Ridge until the railroad decided you could leave." She followed him. The wagon sat behind the station house, hitched to 2 massive draft horses who looked better fed than half the people Evelyn had seen so far. Boone threw her bag in the back without ceremony and climbed up onto the driver's seat. "You coming?" he asked when she didn't immediately follow. Evelyn looked at the wagon, at the town, at the mountains rising behind everything like the walls of a prison built by nature instead of men. She climbed up. Boone snapped the reins and the horses started moving. The wagon lurched over frozen ruts that felt like they might break Evelyn's spine. She grabbed the seat to keep from being thrown off entirely. "How far is the ranch?" she asked. 8 miles. "How long does that take?" "Depends on the snow." "Is it always this cold?" "It's October." Evelyn waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. They rode in silence through the outskirts of town, past a general store with a faded sign, past a church that looked like a strong wind might knock it over, past a saloon where several men stood on the porch watching them leave. One of them said something Evelyn couldn't hear and the others laughed. Her cheeks burned. She didn't look back. The road, such as it was, climbed steadily into the foothills. Trees closed in on both sides, dark and thick with snow. The temperature dropped with every mile. Evelyn's coat, which had been perfectly adequate in Philadelphia, felt about as useful as a cotton dress. She tried to pull it tighter around herself without being obvious about it. Boone noticed anyway. "There's a blanket under the seat," he said. I'm fine." "You're shivering." I said I'm fine. He shrugged like it was no concern of his if she froze to death before they reached the ranch, which it probably wasn't. His advertisement had said he needed someone to cook and care for 6 children. He hadn't mentioned needing someone he actually liked. Evelyn pulled out the blanket. It smelled like horses and old smoke, but it was warm. She wrapped it around her shoulders and stared at the trees passing by, trying not to think about how far she was from anything resembling home. "My letters," Boone said suddenly. "They explain about the children?" 6 of them. Ages 5 to 17. Clara's the oldest. She'll be 18 come spring. Then there's Margaret. We call her Maggie. She's 15. Twins after that, Eliza and Samuel. They're 12. Then Ruth. She's 8. And Daniel's the baby. Just turned 5 last month. Evelyn noted that his voice changed when he talked about them. Got softer. Not soft, exactly. Boone Mercer didn't seem capable of soft, but less hard. Less like he was reading from a list of livestock. "Your wife," Evelyn said carefully. "The letters said she passed almost 2 years ago?" Boone's jaw tightened. "Pneumonia. Took her in 3 days." "I'm sorry." "No need for sorry. You didn't know her." The wagon hit a particularly deep rut, and Evelyn grabbed the seat again. When she looked up, she realized they'd cleared the trees. The ranch spread out below them in a shallow valley, and it looked exactly like what it was, a place that had been barely holding on even before the woman running it died. The main house was 2 stories, wood construction, with a porch that sagged on one side. Several outbuildings clustered nearby. Barn, chicken coop, what might have been a smokehouse. Fences marked off pastures where cattle stood in clumps, their breath steaming in the cold air. It wasn't the worst place Evelyn had ever seen. But it was close. "Home," Boone said, and there was something in his voice that made Evelyn look at him sideways. Not pride, exactly. More like grim determination. This was his, for better or worse, and he'd be damned if he let it fall apart, even if it was clearly falling apart. They pulled up in front of the house, and Boone set the brake. Before he could get down, the front door banged open, and children poured out like someone had shaken them from a bag. 5 of them. Evelyn counted quickly. 1 missing. Pa! A small boy, Daniel had to be, launched himself at Boone before the man's boots hit the ground. "You were gone forever. Mrs. Talbot made us eat cabbage 3 times, and Sam said, 'Daniel, let your father breathe,'" a girl's voice cut in. Sharp, authoritative. Clara emerged last from the house, and Evelyn felt her stomach sink. The girl, young woman really, stood on the porch with her arms crossed, wearing an expression that said she'd already made up her mind about Evelyn, and the verdict was not favorable. She was pretty in a severe way, with her mother's features according to the tintype Boone had sent, and her father's stubborn jaw. "Everyone inside," Clara said. "It's freezing." The children scattered back toward the house except for Daniel, who clung to Boone's leg like a barnacle. The other kids threw glances at Evelyn, curious, uncertain, wary, but none of them spoke. Boone pried Daniel off and turned to Evelyn. Come on, then. He didn't offer to help her down from the wagon. She climbed down herself, nearly slipping on the icy ground, and followed him toward the house with her carpetbag in hand. The porch steps groaned under her weight. One of the boards was cracked straight through and had been repaired with what looked like a piece of fence slat nailed over it. Evelyn made a mental note to avoid that step entirely. Inside was warmer, but not by much. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and general living space. A wood stove in the corner pumped out heat that barely reached the walls. The furniture looked handmade, sturdy enough but showing hard use. Dishes sat piled in the dry sink. The floor needed sweeping. The windows needed washing. Everything needed something. A woman stood near the stove, older, heavy-set, wearing an apron that had seen better decades. She looked at Evelyn with the kind of flat, assessing stare that said, "You won't last a week." "Mrs. Talbot," Boone said. "This is Mrs. Crow." "Mrs. Talbot's been helping with the children since," Evelyn started. "Since someone had to," Mrs. Talbot finished, "seeing as their mother's dead and buried." Silence dropped over the room like a wet blanket. Clara made a small, sharp noise that might have been a gasp or might have been agreement. The younger children shifted uncomfortably. Daniel pressed against Boone's leg again. "Right," Evelyn said quietly. "Since someone had to." Mrs. Talbot's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Surprise, maybe, that Evelyn hadn't flinched. "I'll show you where you'll be sleeping," Clara said. Not an offer, a statement. She headed for the stairs without waiting for Evelyn to follow. Evelyn glanced at Boone, who was already moving toward the door, clearly intent on escaping whatever domestic situation was developing. "I need to check on the cattle," he said to no one in particular. Coward, Evelyn thought. She followed Clara upstairs. The second floor was colder than the first, if that was possible. Clara led her down a narrow hallway past several doors, bedrooms, Evelyn assumed, and stopped at the last one. "Here." Clara pushed the door open. The room was small. A bed, a dresser, a single window that looked out over the barn. Clean, but impersonal. Like a room in a boarding house, not a home. "Thank you," Evelyn said. Clara didn't leave. She stood in the doorway, arms still crossed, studying Evelyn with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable even if Evelyn hadn't just traveled 1,000 miles to marry the girl's father. "You're not what I expected," Clara said finally. "No one ever is." "Pa said you were from Boston." "Originally. I lived in Philadelphia most recently." "Why'd you leave?" "My husband died. Lost everything. Had no reason to stay." Evelyn set her carpetbag on the bed. "Your father's advertisement seemed direct, honest. He needs someone to cook, take care of the kids, keep the house." Clara's voice was flat. "Not someone to replace our mother." There it was, the real conversation. Evelyn turned to face her fully. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm trying to survive the winter, same as you. We were surviving fine before you came." "Were you?" Clara's jaw tightened. For a moment, Evelyn thought the girl might actually throw her out of the room, but Clara just stared at her, breathing hard through her nose, clearly fighting something. "Dinner's at 6, she said finally. "We eat in the kitchen. Mrs. Talbot's been cooking, but I suppose that's your job now." "I suppose it is. Don't expect anyone to make this easy for you." "I don't expect anything," Evelyn said. "Expectations are how people get disappointed." Clara blinked. Then without another word, she turned and left, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Evelyn closed the door and sat down on the bed. The mattress was thin, but it was a mattress, which was more than she'd had some nights in Philadelphia. The room was cold, but it was a room. The situation was impossible, but she'd survived impossible before. She unpacked her carpetbag slowly, methodically. 2 dresses, 1 skirt, 3 blouses, undergarments, her mother's hairbrush, Thomas's pocket watch, which had stopped working the day he died and which she couldn't bring herself to wind again, and the cookbook. She untied the twine carefully and opened it to the first page, where her mother had written in faded ink, "For Evelyn, who makes everything taste like home." Evelyn closed the book before the tears could start. Crying wouldn't help. Crying never helped. She'd learned that after Thomas died, after the creditors came, after she'd sold everything they owned and still couldn't pay what they owed. What helped was work. What helped was keeping your hands busy and your mind focused on the next task and the next and the next, until you looked up and realized you'd survived another day. She changed into her work dress, the sturdy one that could handle heat and stains and hard labor, and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for Mrs. Talbot, who stood at the dry sink peeling potatoes with the kind of aggressive efficiency that suggested she was imagining them as something else. "Thought you'd rest," Mrs. Talbot said without looking up. "No point in resting. There's work to do." "There's always work to do on a ranch." Evelyn surveyed the kitchen properly now. Dishes piled everywhere. The stove needed cleaning. The floor definitely needed sweeping. Supplies were stored haphazardly. Flour in one place, sugar in another, dried goods scattered across 3 different shelves like someone had given up halfway through organizing. "What were you planning for dinner?" Evelyn asked. Mrs. Talbot gestured at the potatoes. "These. Some of that salt pork. Maybe beans if I can find where Clara put them last week." "May I?" Evelyn gestured at the pantry. Mrs. Talbot shrugged. "It's your kitchen now, or it's supposed to be." Evelyn ignored the implication and opened the pantry door. What she found made her physically wince. It wasn't that there was no food. There was food, but it was stored like someone who didn't know how to cook had been trying to manage a kitchen. Dry goods mixed with perishables. Open flour sacks sitting next to onions. A container of what might have been butter, or might have been lard sitting open on a shelf, growing something that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. "How long have you been managing the kitchen?" Evelyn asked carefully. "Plus 6 months, give or take. Before that, it was Clara trying to do it around school lessons and everything else." Mrs. Talbot's voice softened slightly. "I'm a ranch hand's wife, Mrs. Crow. I can birth a calf and mend a fence and shoot a coyote at 30 yards, but I can't cook worth a damn." It was the first honest thing anyone had said to Evelyn since she arrived. "Well," Evelyn said, "I can't birth a calf or shoot a coyote, but I can cook." She rolled up her sleeves. For the next 2 hours, Evelyn worked. She cleaned the stove, swept the floor, reorganized the pantry into something that made sense, found the beans Clara had hidden behind a sack of cornmeal, located a crock of sourdough starter someone had abandoned in the cold cellar. It smelled sour, but not dead, which meant it could be saved. Mrs. Talbot watched her work with an expression that gradually shifted from skeptical to grudgingly impressed. "You always work like this?" she asked. "Like what? Like someone's chasing you." Evelyn paused in scrubbing the stove. "Working helps me think." "What are you thinking about?" "How to survive this place. How to make these children trust me. How to keep Boone from looking at me like I'm a burden he can't quite afford." "Dinner," Evelyn said. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled different. Better. The stove was hot, the table was set, and Evelyn had managed to produce something that resembled an actual meal. Pan-fried salt pork, beans cooked with onions and a hint of molasses, potatoes roasted with herbs she'd found dried in the pantry, and biscuits. The biscuits were her peace offering. Everyone loved biscuits. The children came in slowly, drawn by the smell. They sat at the table in what were clearly assigned seats, Clara at one end, the younger ones arranged by age down the sides. Boone took the other end, still wearing his work clothes, smelling like cattle in cold air. No one spoke. Evelyn served the food, feeling their eyes on her, judging, measuring. She'd felt this before, in Philadelphia, when Thomas's business partners had looked at her across tables and decided she wasn't worth their time. She set a plate in front of Boone. He looked at it, then at her, then back at the plate. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, but they were the first polite words he'd said since she arrived. The children attacked their food like they'd been starving. Maybe they had been, in a way. Mrs. Talbot had tried her best, but trying and succeeding were different things. "These biscuits," one of the twins said. Samuel, Evelyn thought. "These are really good." His sister Eliza kicked him under the table. "What?" "They are." "Don't talk with your mouth full," Clara snapped. "I wasn't—" "Both of you hush," Boone said quietly. "And Samuel's right. They're good biscuits." Silence again, but different this time, less hostile, more uncertain. The younger children finished first and looked at Clara for permission to leave. She nodded and they scattered, taking their plates to the dry sink before disappearing into other parts of the house. Ruth, the 8-year-old, lingered near the stove, watching Evelyn clean up. "Can I help?" she asked softly. "Ruth, leave her alone," Claire said. "I don't mind," Evelyn said. "You can dry the dishes if you'd like." Ruth's face lit up. She grabbed a towel and stood next to Evelyn, carefully drying each plate like it was made of glass. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't have to. The gesture said enough. Clara watched them for a moment, her expression unreadable, then stood abruptly. "I'm checking on the chickens." She left. Mrs. Talbot followed shortly after, muttering something about her husband expecting his own supper. Boone disappeared onto the porch with his pipe. Evelyn and Ruth finished the dishes in companionable silence. When they were done, Ruth looked up at her with serious brown eyes. "Will you make biscuits again?" she asked. "If you'd like." "I'd like." She ran off before Evelyn could respond, leaving her alone in the kitchen with the sounds of the ranch settling around her. Wind against windows, footsteps overhead, the distant lowing of cattle in the barn. Evelyn dried her hands and looked around the kitchen she'd just claimed. It wasn't much. It wasn't home. But it was hers now, for better or worse. She thought about the sourdough starter in the cold cellar, about how you could take something that looked dead and bring it back to life if you were patient enough, if you fed it carefully, if you kept it warm and gave it time to grow. Maybe kitchens weren't the only things that worked that way. Evelyn checked the stove one last time, banked the fire for the night, and headed upstairs to her cold little room. Tomorrow she'd wake before dawn and start a fire and make breakfast and begin again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Because that's what you did when you had nowhere else to go. You stayed, you worked, you survived. And maybe, if you were lucky, you found a way to live. Evelyn woke to darkness and the sound of someone vomiting. She sat up fast, disoriented, her breath clouding in the freezing air. The room was black except for a sliver of moonlight through the window. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back in a rush. Wyoming, the ranch, her new life that felt less like a life and more like a sentence. The retching sound came again, closer now, from down the hall. She grabbed her shawl and opened the door. The hallway was even colder than her room, and she could see her breath in the dim light from downstairs. One of the bedroom doors stood open. A small figure hunched in the doorway. Daniel. The boy was doubled over, heaving, his whole body shaking. Evelyn reached him in 3 steps. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, it's all right." He looked up at her with terrified eyes, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, I couldn't." He vomited again, missing the floor this time and hitting his own nightshirt. The smell hit Evelyn immediately, sharp, acidic, wrong. "Clara!" Evelyn called. "Clara, I need help!" Footsteps thundered from the room next door. Clara appeared, already dressed despite the hour, her hair in a loose braid. She took one look at Daniel and her face went white. "Not again," she whispered. "Again?" Evelyn grabbed Daniel before he could collapse. The boy was burning up, his skin so hot it felt like touching a stove. "How long has he been sick?" "He was fine at dinner. He was—" Clara's voice cracked. "He gets fevers sometimes, since Ma died. They come fast and they—" "Get your father, now." Clara ran. Evelyn half-carried, half-dragged Daniel back into his room and laid him on the bed. His teeth were chattering so hard she could hear them clicking together. She pulled the blankets up around him, but he thrashed them off immediately, whimpering. "Hurts," he gasped. "Everything hurts." Boone appeared in the doorway, pulling suspenders over his undershirt, looking more afraid than Evelyn had seen him look at anything yet. Behind him, the other children crowded in the hallway, Maggie holding Ruth, the twins clinging to each other. "How bad?" Boone asked, his voice tight. "Bad. When did this happen before?" 3 times since Sarah died. He moved to the bed, put his hand on Daniel's forehead, and flinched. "Last time the doctor said if it happened again." He didn't finish. Didn't have to. "Get me hot water," Evelyn said. "Clean cloths. Willow bark if you have it. Anything for fever." "We used the last of the willow bark in August," Clara said from the doorway. "There's nothing—" "Then find me something else. Check the pantry. Check everywhere." Evelyn stripped the soiled nightshirt off Daniel, trying to ignore how small he looked, how fragile. "Go!" They scattered. Boone stayed, standing at the foot of the bed like a man watching something drown and knowing he couldn't reach it. "Help me or get out," Evelyn said sharply. He flinched. Then he moved, stripping the wet sheets off the bed while Evelyn held Daniel. The boy was shaking so hard now his teeth had drawn blood from his own lip. "I need him cooler," Evelyn said. "Is there snow outside?" "It's October. There's always snow outside. Get me a bucket of it. Clean snow, not the dirty stuff near the barn." Boone stared at her. "You want to put snow on a boy with fever?" "I want to bring his temperature down before he seizes. Get the snow." He left. Maggie appeared with an armload of clean sheets and Ruth trailing behind her carrying a basin of water that sloshed with each step. The twins brought cloths. Clara came last, empty-handed, shaking her head. "There's nothing. I checked everywhere. We're out of everything." Evelyn's mind raced. She'd seen fevers before. Bad ones. Thomas's mother had died of one the winter before they married, burning up in her bed, while 3 different doctors stood around looking useless. But there had been medicine then, pharmacies, options. Here, there was nothing. Except there had to be something. She closed her eyes, thinking. Her mother's kitchen. The herbs hanging to dry near the window. The tisanes she'd made for headaches, for coughs, for fevers. What had she used? What grew even in cold places? "The cold cellar," Evelyn said suddenly. "Is there anything growing down there? Anything that looks like—" "There's nothing but potatoes and that old sourdough," Clara interrupted. "Check anyway. Look for dried herbs, bundles hanging from the ceiling. Your mother would have—" "My mother's been dead for almost 2 years," Clara snapped. "Anything she had is long gone." "Then look anyway." Clara's eyes widened. For a moment, Evelyn thought she'd pushed too hard, that the girl would tell her to go to hell and walk out. Instead, Clara turned and ran. Boone came back with the snow. Evelyn wrapped handfuls of it in clean cloths and pressed them against Daniel's neck, his wrists, behind his knees. The boy cried out, but she didn't stop. "Hold him still," she told Boone. He pinned Daniel's shoulders gently while Evelyn worked. The snow melted almost immediately against the boy's skin. She replaced it, again and again, until her hands were numb and Daniel's shaking started to ease just slightly. Clara burst back into the room holding a dusty basket. "Found this," she gasped, "in the back corner, behind the preserves." Evelyn grabbed it. Inside were bundles of dried plants, most of them so old they'd turned to powder, but one. She held it up to the lamplight and nearly cried with relief. Yarrow. Old, but yarrow didn't lose its properties fast. "Boil water," she told Maggie, "as hot as you can get it." She crushed the yarrow between her palms while she waited, releasing the sharp, almost peppery smell. When Maggie came back with the pot, Evelyn dumped the herbs in and let them steep while Daniel's temperature climbed higher despite the snow. "Is he going to die?" Ruth asked from the doorway, her voice tiny. "No," Evelyn said firmly. She didn't know if it was true. She just knew that's what the little girl needed to hear. The yarrow tea was bitter enough to strip paint. Daniel fought it at first, turning his head away, but Evelyn was stronger and more stubborn than a 5-year-old boy, even a sick one. She got half the cup into him before he vomited it back up. She made him drink more. "You're torturing him," Clara said. "I'm keeping him alive." "You don't know that. You're not a doctor. Neither is anyone else here." Evelyn pressed another snowcloth to Daniel's forehead. "So unless you want to ride 8 miles into town in the dark to fetch one, this is what we have." Clara's jaw worked. "The doctor won't come at night anyway, not for—" She stopped. "Not for what?" Evelyn looked up. "Not for a rancher who can't pay?" The silence was answer enough. Boone stood at the window now, staring out at the darkness like he could will the sun to rise faster. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Until what?" "Until we know if—" He couldn't finish. "Until morning, maybe longer." Evelyn changed the cloth again. "Fevers like this, they peak and break or they peak and don't. We won't know until we know." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Daniel moaned and thrashed, nearly catching Evelyn across the face with one flailing arm. She pinned him down with help from the twins, who'd crept into the room despite Clara's earlier order to stay in bed. The night stretched on. Evelyn lost track of time. She cycled through snow and yarrow, tea, and cool cloths while the children took turns bringing supplies and watching their baby brother burn. Clara hovered in the doorway, not helping, but not leaving either. Boone paced between the window and the bed like a caged animal. Somewhere around what Evelyn guessed was 3 in the morning, Daniel started to seize. His whole body went rigid, then began to convulse so hard the bed frame rattled. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. His eyes rolled back. "Turn him on his side," Evelyn shouted. "Don't let him choke." Boone moved faster than she'd thought possible, rolling Daniel over while Evelyn cleared his mouth with her fingers. The seizure lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like 30 minutes. When it stopped, Daniel went completely limp. "Is he breathing?" Claire's voice was high and tight. "Is he—" "He's breathing." Evelyn pressed her ear to his chest to be sure. "He's breathing." But he was hotter now, so hot she could feel it radiating off him from inches away. The yarrow wasn't working. The snow wasn't working. Nothing was working. And she was out of ideas, and this little boy was going to die in front of his entire family because she didn't know what else to do. "There has to be something else," she said, more to herself than anyone. "There has to be—" "There's nothing," Clara said flatly. "This is how it happens. This is how Don't!" Boone's voice cut like a blade. "Don't say it." Evelyn stood up so fast she knocked over the basin of water. It splashed across the floor, but she didn't care. She was thinking about Philadelphia, about the boarding house, about the old woman in the room next to hers who'd survived scarlet fever as a child. "Elderberry," the woman had said. "My grandmother made us drink elderberry syrup until we were sick of it, but it broke the fever when nothing else would." "Elderberry?" Evelyn said aloud. "Do you have elderberry bushes anywhere on the property?" Everyone stared at her. "It's October," Boone said. "Even if we had elderberry, the berries would be long gone. But the bushes would still be there. I can make syrup from the bark if I have to, from the leaves, from anything." She grabbed Clara's shoulders. "Think. Did your mother ever pick elderberries? Ever make preserves or syrup?" "I don't. There might be some near the creek, down past the south pasture, but in the dark, in the snow." "Show me." "You can't be serious." "Show me or he dies. Those are the options." Clara looked at her father. Boone looked at Daniel, whose breathing had gone shallow and fast. Then he looked at Evelyn, and something in his expression changed. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. "I'll take you," he said. They left the other children with instructions to keep the cloths cool and the yarrow tea going. Clara stayed at Daniel's bedside, her hand on his chest to feel him breathing. Evelyn grabbed her coat and followed Boone down the stairs and out into the night. The cold hit like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees since sunset, turning the snow brittle and the air sharp enough to hurt. Boone lit a lantern and started walking without waiting to see if she'd follow. She followed. The south pasture was further than Evelyn had realized, and the snow was deeper. Her skirts dragged, collecting ice. Her boots, which had seemed sturdy in Philadelphia, leaked freezing water with every step. Boone didn't slow down. He moved like a man possessed, the lantern swinging wild shadows across the snow. "There," he said finally, pointing to a line of skeletal bushes near a frozen creek. "That's elderberry. Sarah used to harvest it every August." Evelyn waded through knee-deep snow to the nearest bush. The berries were long gone, like Boone had said, but the bark was there, and the branches. She started breaking off pieces, not caring that the wood was frozen or that her hands were already numb. "How much do you need?" Boone asked. "All of it." They stripped 3 bushes bare, filling Evelyn's coat pockets and Boone's arms with branches. The work warmed her slightly, but not enough. By the time they started back toward the house, she couldn't feel her feet anymore. Halfway there, she stumbled, just caught herself on a fence post before she went down completely. Boone grabbed her arm. "You all right?" "Fine." "You don't look fine." "I don't need to look fine. I need to get back and make syrup before your son—" She stopped. Couldn't say it out loud. They made it back to the house. Evelyn's hand shook so badly she could barely work the latch. Inside, the kitchen was warm and bright, and Maggie was waiting with a pot of water already boiling. "Clara sent me down," she said. "Said you'd need this." Smart girl. Evelyn dumped the elderberry branches into the pot and started stripping bark into the water while it boiled. The smell that rose up was bitter and green and not particularly pleasant, but she'd smelled worse. She added sugar, too much probably, but Daniel needed to be able to drink this, and let it reduce while she tried to warm her frozen hands. Boone paced. Maggie sat at the table, her eyes red from crying. Footsteps creaked overhead. The other children, still awake, still waiting. When the syrup had reduced to maybe half a cup of dark, thick liquid, Evelyn strained it through a cloth and carried it upstairs. Her hands were steadier now, steadier than they had any right to be. Daniel looked worse. His lips had gone blue at the edges. His breathing sounded like cloth tearing. Clara sat beside him, holding his hand, her face completely blank in that way people's faces went when they were trying not to fall apart. "Sit him up," Evelyn said. Between her and Boone, they got Daniel propped against the headboard. Evelyn tipped the cup to his lips. The syrup was still hot. Daniel's mouth moved, but nothing came out at first. "Come on," Evelyn murmured. "Come on, drink it, just a little." The first swallow went down, then another. Then Daniel turned his head and vomited elderberry syrup all over the fresh sheets. Evelyn made him drink more. "You're killing him," Clara said, but there was no heat in it anymore. Just exhaustion. "Maybe," Evelyn said, "but doing nothing will definitely kill him. So we're trying this." She got another quarter cup into Daniel before he stopped fighting and went limp again. His temperature was still climbing. She could feel it through his nightshirt. There was nothing left to do but wait. Evelyn pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down. Boone took the other side. Clara stayed at the foot, her arms wrapped around herself. The other children drifted in one by one until the whole family was crowded into that small bedroom, watching Daniel breathe. Evelyn didn't remember deciding to pray. She hadn't prayed since Thomas died, hadn't seen the point. But her lips moved anyway, forming words she didn't believe in anymore, just in case someone was listening. Dawn came slowly. The sky outside the window shifted from black to gray to pale pink. Birds started singing. The ranch woke up around them, livestock needing feeding, chores needing doing, but nobody moved. Daniel's breathing changed sometime around sunrise. It slowed, deepened. The rattle in his chest eased. Evelyn put her hand on his forehead and felt the fever starting to break. "He's cooling down," she said. Everyone leaned forward. Clara touched her brother's face, then looked at Evelyn with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been shock or might have been both. "You did it," she whispered. "We don't know yet. The fever could come back. He could—" "You did it," Clara said again, louder. Daniel opened his eyes. They were unfocused and glassy, but they were open. He looked at Evelyn, then at his father, then closed them again and went back to sleep. Real sleep this time, not the feverish half-consciousness he'd been trapped in all night. Boone stood up so fast his chair fell over. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to them, his shoulders shaking. Evelyn left him alone. Some grief was private, even when it was relief. She checked Daniel one more time, breathing steady, temperature still dropping, then stood on legs that barely supported her. Every muscle in her body ached. Her hands were raw. Her dress was soaked with sweat and snowmelt and probably vomit. "I'll stay with him," Clara said quietly. "You should rest." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Evelyn nodded and left the room. In the hallway, Maggie caught her in a fierce hug that smelled like smoke and little girl tears. "Thank you," Maggie whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Evelyn held her for a moment, then gently pushed her toward the bedroom. "Go sit with your sister. Keep watch. Come get me if anything changes." She made it to her own room and closed the door before her legs gave out entirely. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed and let herself shake. Not crying, just shaking, the adrenaline draining away and leaving nothing but exhaustion behind. She'd done it. Somehow. Against every odd and with no business succeeding, she'd kept that little boy alive. The relief was so intense it hurt. When she finally crawled into bed, still wearing her filthy dress, she slept for exactly 2 hours before the sound of voices downstairs woke her. She lay there for a moment, listening. Not shouting, just talking. The normal sounds of a household starting its day. She got up, changed into her other work dress, and went downstairs. The kitchen was full. All the children except Daniel sat around the table eating what looked like leftover biscuits and jam. Mrs. Talbot stood at the stove, frying eggs. Boone sat at the head of the table, looking like he hadn't slept at all, which he probably hadn't. Everyone stopped talking when Evelyn walked in. "Daniel?" she asked. "Still sleeping," Claire said. "Temperature's normal. He woke up an hour ago asking for water." The knot in Evelyn's chest loosened slightly. "Did he drink it?" "Whole cup. Then went back to sleep." "Good, that's good." She moved to the stove, intending to help Mrs. Talbot, but the older woman waved her off. "Sit," Mrs. Talbot said. "You've earned it." Evelyn sat. Someone, Ruth probably, put a cup of coffee in front of her. It was terrible coffee, boiled too long and bitter, but it was hot, and she was grateful. "You should eat," Maggie said, pushing a plate toward her. "I'm not... Eat anyway." Evelyn picked up a biscuit. It was one of hers from yesterday, somehow still good. She ate it mechanically, not tasting anything, while the children watched her like she might disappear if they looked away. "Mrs. Talbot says you went down to the creek," Samuel said, "in the middle of the night, in the snow." "We needed elderberry." "That's crazy." "Samuel," Clara warned. "No, it is. You could have frozen to death, or gotten lost, or—" "But she didn't," Eliza interrupted. "She came back, and Daniel's okay." The twins looked at each other in that way twins did, communicating something without words. Then they both looked at Evelyn. "Thank you," they said in unison. Evelyn's throat tightened. "You're welcome." Boone stood abruptly. "I need to check on the cattle." He was gone before anyone could respond, the door banging shut behind him. Mrs. Talbot watched him go with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Give him time," she said quietly. Losing Sarah near broke him. Last night probably felt like losing her all over again. "I didn't do it for him," Evelyn said before she could stop herself. "No, you did it for Daniel, which is exactly right." Mrs. Talbot cracked another egg into the pan. "But it matters to him anyway." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Evelyn checked on Daniel every hour. He was improving steadily, asking for food by mid-morning and complaining about being stuck in bed by noon. Clara stayed with him, reading aloud from a book while he dozed. The other children orbited Evelyn like planets around the sun. They helped with dishes without being asked. Ruth followed her to the chicken coop and back. The twins offered to carry water from the well. Even Maggie, who'd been polite but distant before, started talking to her about small things: the weather, the chickens, a dress pattern she'd seen in town. It felt like something had shifted, not broken. Evelyn wasn't naive enough to think one night had fixed everything, but shifted. Like a door that had been closed was now cracked open just enough to see through. Boone didn't come back until after dark. He smelled like horses and cold air and looked exhausted. He went straight upstairs to check on Daniel, stayed there for maybe 10 minutes, then came back down and sat at the table while Evelyn served dinner. She'd made stew. Nothing fancy, just what she could manage with the supplies on hand, but it was hot and filling and nobody complained. After the children scattered to their evening routines, Boone lingered at the table. Evelyn washed dishes, hyper-aware of him sitting there, not speaking. Finally he said, "The elderberry, how'd you know?" "I didn't, not for sure. I just remembered someone talking about it once." "You gambled." "I did." "Could have killed him." "So could doing nothing." He was quiet for a long moment. Sarah would have known what to do. She always knew. Evelyn dried a plate slowly. "I'm sure she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Boone stood, pushing his chair back. But she's dead, and you're here, and Daniel's alive because of it." It wasn't praise. It wasn't even gratitude. Not really. But it was acknowledgement. That was something. He stopped at the door, hand on the frame, not looking back. "Town's going to hear about this. They're probably already talking. Let them talk. They'll say you're trying too hard, that you're putting on a show, that you won't last past winter." "Do you believe that?" He turned then, looked at her properly for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. "I don't know what I believe yet." He left. Evelyn finished the dishes alone, then checked on Daniel one last time before heading to bed. The boy was deeply asleep, his color normal, his breathing easy. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her book open on her lap. Evelyn covered her with a blanket and left them there. In her own room, she sat on the bed and stared at her hands. They were scratched from the elderberry branches. Raw from the cold, red from washing dishes and wringing out cloths and doing everything that needed doing. Her mother's hands had looked like this. Working hands, capable hands, hands that kept a family fed and warm and alive. Evelyn had thought she'd left that life behind when she married Thomas. Thought she'd moved up into something easier, softer. But maybe this was where she'd always been headed. Maybe some women were built for hard places and hard work. Maybe she was one of them. Outside, snow began to fall again. Not the heavy wet flakes from earlier, but small, hard crystals that ticked against the window like thrown rice. Winter was coming, real winter, the kind that killed people who weren't prepared for it. But tonight, in this house, everyone was alive. Evelyn lay down and pulled the thin blanket over herself and decided that was enough. The women came on a Tuesday. Evelyn was in the kitchen kneading bread when she heard the wagon. She looked out the window and saw 3 of them climbing down. Mrs. Patterson from the general store, Mrs. Hendricks, who ran the boarding house, and a younger woman Evelyn didn't recognize. They wore their town clothes and serious expressions. Clara appeared at Evelyn's elbow. "What do they want?" "I don't know." "Should I get Pa?" "No." Evelyn wiped flour off her hands. "I'll handle it." She opened the door before they could knock. The 3 women stood on the porch looking uncertain, which was interesting because Mrs. Patterson had never looked uncertain about anything in her life, at least not from what Evelyn had observed during her one trip to town. "Mrs. Crow," Mrs. Patterson said, "we hope we're not intruding." "Not at all. Would you like to come in?" They filed into the kitchen, looking around like they were cataloging everything. The clean floor, the organized pantry, the bread rising near the warm stove. Evelyn saw Mrs. Hendricks' eyebrows go up slightly. "Coffee?" Evelyn offered. "That would be lovely." She poured 4 cups while the women settled at the table. Clara hovered near the stairs, clearly debating whether to stay or flee. Evelyn caught her eye and gave a small nod toward the door. The girl disappeared, but Evelyn knew she'd be listening from the hallway. "We heard about Daniel," Mrs. Patterson said once everyone had coffee. "About his fever." "He's recovering well. Thank you for asking." "Mrs. Talbot said you went out in the middle of the night, down to the creek in the snow." Of course she had. Mrs. Talbot probably told half the town by sunrise. "Daniel needed medicine. I went to get it." "Elderberry," the younger woman said. "My grandmother used elderberry for fevers. I didn't know anyone still did." "I didn't know if it would work," Evelyn admitted. "I just knew I had to try something." The women exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication Evelyn couldn't quite read. "The thing is," Mrs. Hendricks said slowly, "we may have misjudged you." Evelyn sipped her coffee and waited. "When Boone said he was bringing in a city woman, we thought you'd last maybe a week. Maybe 2 if you were stubborn." "I am stubborn." "Clearly," Mrs. Patterson smiled slightly, "but it's more than that. What you did for Daniel, that took more than stubbornness. That took backbone." The younger woman leaned forward. "I'm Elizabeth Morris. My husband works one of the ranches north of here. We've got 4 children, and I've been managing alone since he broke his leg in August." She paused. "I was wondering if you might share that elderberry recipe." "Of course." "And," Mrs. Hendricks added, "we were hoping you might come to town meeting next week. There's a quilting circle. We meet Thursdays. Not much excitement, but the company's decent." Evelyn set down her cup carefully. This was an olive branch. A small one, maybe, but an olive branch nonetheless. "I'd like that," she said. They stayed another 20 minutes, talking about winter preparations and whose cow had gone dry and whether the railroad might run more than once a week come spring. Normal things. Neighborly things. When they left, Mrs. Patterson paused at the door. "We were wrong about you, Mrs. Crow. It takes a certain kind of woman to survive out here. I think you might be that kind." After they'd gone, Clara emerged from her hiding spot. "What just happened?" "I think," Evelyn said slowly, "I just got accepted into Blackstone Ridge Society." "We don't have society. We barely have a town." Even small towns have their hierarchies. Evelyn went back to her bread. "And apparently I just climbed a rung or 2. Clara was quiet for a moment. "They never invited Ma to the quilting circle, said she was too busy with the ranch." Maybe they were intimidated by her? Or maybe they're only being nice to you because you're new and they feel guilty. Clara's voice had that sharp edge again, the one that meant she was protecting something. "Don't trust it. Don't trust them." Evelyn punched down the bread dough. I don't trust easily, but I'm not going to turn down help when it's offered either. Help always comes with conditions. So does everything. Evelyn shaped the dough into loaves. The question is whether the conditions are worth it. She went to the Thursday quilting circle. Boone didn't want her to, said there was too much work at the ranch, that she was needed there, but Evelyn borrowed the wagon anyway and made the 8-mile trip into town with Clara and Maggie for company. The circle met in this back room of the general store. 7 women total, ranging from Elizabeth Morris, who couldn't have been older than 25, to Mrs. Patterson, who was easily 60. They were working on a wedding quilt for someone's niece, and the stitching was meticulous in that way. Women's handiwork was when it was one of the few creative outlets available. Evelyn knew how to quilt. Her mother had taught her. She took up a needle and fell into the rhythm of it while the women talked around her. Mostly they talked about the weather, about whose husband was drinking too much at the saloon, about the new school teacher who was apparently too pretty for her own good. Normal gossip, harmless. Then Mrs. Hendricks said, I heard the Jacobson place lost half their cattle to that early snow we had in September. Shouldn't have kept them in the high pasture so late, another woman said. Shouldn't have, but did. Now they're struggling. Won't make it through winter at this rate. Evelyn kept her eyes on her stitching. Is there no way to help them? The room went quiet. Help how? Mrs. Patterson asked. I don't know. A collection? Shared supplies? We're all barely making it ourselves, Mrs. Crow. Can't give what we don't have. But if everyone gave a little— That's city thinking, one of the older women interrupted, not unkindly, but firmly. Out here, you take care of your own. The Jacobsons made bad choices. That's not our burden to carry. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to point out that a community that didn't help its struggling members wasn't much of a community, but she was still the outsider here, still the one being evaluated. So she nodded and went back to her stitching and kept her mouth shut. On the ride home, Clara said, You think they're wrong about the Jacobsons. I think survival is easier when people help each other. You can't save everyone. No, but you can try. Maggie, who'd been quiet most of the day, spoke up from the back of the wagon. Ma used to say the same thing, that we should look out for our neighbors. What happened? Evelyn asked. We looked out for our neighbors, and our neighbors let us down when we needed them most. Clara's voice was flat. When Ma got sick, not one person from town came to help. They were all too afraid of catching it themselves. Evelyn didn't have an answer for that. She just drove the wagon home through the gathering dusk and thought about how fear made people cruel in ways they probably didn't even recognize. November came in cold and stayed cold. The first real snow hit the week before Thanksgiving, dumping 2 feet overnight and making the roads nearly impassable. Evelyn woke to a world that looked like it had been wrapped in white cloth, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. She'd been at the ranch 6 weeks now. 6 weeks of cooking and cleaning and managing 6 children who ranged from openly hostile to cautiously accepting. 6 weeks of Boone barely speaking to her except when necessary. 6 weeks of proving herself in small ways that probably didn't add up to much. But the children were healthier. Daniel had recovered completely and was back to his usual chaos. The house was warmer because Evelyn had figured out how to bank the stove properly. The meals were better because she actually knew how to cook. Small victories. Incremental progress. Then the blizzard warning came. The sheriff rode out to all the outlying ranches himself, which was how they knew it was serious. He sat at their kitchen table drinking coffee and looking grim while he explained that the Weather Service in Cheyenne had issued an alert. Big storm coming, maybe the worst in a decade. Everyone needed to prepare. How long do we have? Boone asked. 2 days, maybe 3 if we're lucky. And how long will it last? Could be a week, could be longer. The sheriff stood. Get your livestock under cover, stock up on firewood. Make sure you've got enough food to last if the roads are closed for a while. After he left, Boone started making lists. What needed to be done. What supplies they had. What they were short on. His handwriting was terrible, almost illegible, but Evelyn had learned to read it over the past weeks. We need more flour, she said, reading over his shoulder. And salt. We're low on both. Town might already be out of supplies. Everyone's going to be buying. Then we go now, before everyone else gets there. He looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. It's 8 miles each way, in a wagon, with more snow coming, which is exactly why we need to go now instead of waiting. Evelyn grabbed her coat. I'll drive if you're too worried about the horses. I'm not worried about the horses. Then what's the problem? He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. You're as stubborn as what? Nothing. Get the wagon ready. They made it to town in just under 2 hours. The general store was already crowded with people buying everything they could carry. Mrs. Patterson looked harassed behind the counter, trying to manage 3 customers at once, while her husband hauled supplies from the back room. Evelyn grabbed flour and salt and dried beans, while Boone loaded up on things like nails and rope and other ranch necessities she didn't fully understand. At the counter, Mrs. Patterson tallied their purchases with quick, efficient movements. You preparing for the blizzard or the end of times? She asked. Just the blizzard, Boone said. I hope. Smart. This one's going to be bad. She wrapped their purchases in brown paper. You get home safe, you hear? Don't want to lose our best elderberry expert. Evelyn felt something warm in her chest. Acceptance, maybe. Or just the relief of being treated like she belonged somewhere. They were loading the wagon when someone said, Well, look who it is. The tiny city widow. Evelyn turned. 3 men stood outside the saloon, clearly already drunk despite it being barely noon. The one who'd spoken was tall and raw-boned, wearing a sneer that looked practiced. James, Boone said, his voice dropping into a warning tone. Boone. The man, James, pushed off the wall and ambled over. Heard you got yourself a new wife. Or close enough, anyway. We're leaving, James. Get out of the way. Just being neighborly. Just wondering how long this one's going to last. He looked at Evelyn with eyes that were slightly unfocused. 2 months? 3? I got money says she runs before Christmas. Evelyn felt Boone tense beside her, felt him about to step forward and do something stupid. She put her hand on his arm. I'll take that bet, she said calmly. James blinked. What? I said I'll take that bet. How much are you wagering? Evelyn, Boone started. $20 says I'm still here come spring, she continued, ignoring him. You willing to back up your mouth with actual money? James laughed, but it sounded uncertain now. You don't have $20. Then you've got nothing to worry about. She climbed into the wagon. Come on, Boone. We're wasting daylight. Boone stood there for a moment longer, staring at James like he was deciding whether to hit him. Then he climbed up beside Evelyn and snapped the reins. They were half a mile out of town before he spoke. You don't have $20. I know. So why? Because men like that only understand 2 things, money and pride. I just made it about both. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Just once, just a short bark of sound, but it was the first time she'd heard him laugh. Sarah used to do things like that, he said. Say something completely unexpected and make everyone else look stupid. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife without it sounding like a wound. Evelyn took that as progress. The snow started falling that night, not the blizzard yet, just the precursor. Fat, lazy flakes that piled up slowly but steadily. By morning, there was another 6 inches on the ground, and the sky had turned the color of old pewter. Evelyn spent the day preparing. She baked bread until the oven gave out, made stew in the biggest pot they had, organized the pantry so she knew exactly what they had and where it was. The children helped, even Clara, who'd been less hostile lately, but still kept her distance. Boone and the ranch hands moved the cattle into the barn, reinforced the fences, chopped enough firewood to get them through a siege. Everyone moved with urgency, preparing for something they couldn't see yet but knew was coming. The blizzard hit on the 3rd day. Evelyn had seen snow before. Boston got snow. Philadelphia got snow. But this was something different entirely. This was Wyoming deciding to remind everyone who was really in charge. The wind hit first, hard enough to rattle the windows in their frames. Then the snow came, not falling so much as being thrown sideways by the wind. Within an hour, Evelyn couldn't see the barn from the house. Within 2 hours, the world outside had disappeared entirely into a wall of white. Everyone inside, Boone ordered. No one goes out for any reason, not even to the barn. But the animals, Samuel started, are fine. They're in shelter and they've got feed and water. We check on them when the wind dies down. It didn't die down. Not for 3 days. The house became an island in a sea of white chaos. The children grew restless, confined to close quarters with nothing to do but wait. Evelyn kept them busy with tasks, reading lessons for the younger ones, mending for the older ones, kitchen work for anyone who wanted to escape the main room. On the second day, Ruth started crying because she couldn't remember what the sun looked like. Evelyn held her and told her stories about summer until the girl fell asleep against her shoulder. On the third day, they ran out of firewood in the main room. "There's more in the shed," Boone said, staring at the dying fire. "The shed is 30 feet from the house," Clara pointed out. "You can't see your hand in front of your face out there." "So we freeze?" "So we wait for the storm to break. And if it doesn't?" Everyone looked at each other. The temperature in the house was already dropping. Without the fire, they'd be in real trouble by nightfall. "I'll go," Evelyn said. "Absolutely not," Boone said immediately. "Why not?" "Because you'll get lost and die within 10 feet of the porch." "Then tie a rope around me. One end to the porch post, other end to me. I follow it out to the shed, load up firewood, follow it back." "That's insane. You have a better idea?" He didn't. Nobody did. They used 3 different ropes tied together to make sure it was long enough. Boone tied one end to the porch post himself, testing it twice. Then he tied the other end around Evelyn's waist, tight enough to hurt. "You feel the rope go slack. You stop immediately," he said. "You get disoriented. You follow the rope back. You understand?" "I understand." "Evelyn." He grabbed her shoulders. "I'm serious. This storm will kill you if you give it a chance." "Then I won't give it a chance." She wrapped herself in every coat and blanket they had and stepped out onto the porch. The wind hit like a fist, hard enough to knock her back a step. The cold was instant and vicious, finding every gap in her clothing within seconds. She couldn't see anything, just white, just wind and snow and cold. Evelyn took a breath that hurt going down and started walking, one hand on the rope. 5 steps, 10. She couldn't see the house behind her anymore, couldn't see the shed ahead. Just white. Her foot hit something solid. The shed. She'd made it. The door was frozen shut. She had to kick it 3 times before it gave way, nearly sending her sprawling into the snowdrift that had piled against the far wall. Inside was marginally better. At least the wind wasn't actively trying to kill her. She loaded her arms with as much wood as she could carry and turned back toward the door. The rope was still there, still tight, still leading back to safety. She followed it. The walk back felt longer. The wind had gotten worse, or maybe she was just more tired, or maybe the cold was getting to her. Her hands were numb. Her face was numb. Everything was numb except the burning in her lungs from breathing frozen air. Then she saw it. A dark shape in the white. The porch. She'd made it. Hands grabbed her, pulled her inside. Boone, looking furious and terrified in equal measure. He hauled her into the house and slammed the door behind them. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted. Evelyn dropped the firewood on the floor. "We needed wood." "We needed—" He stopped, took a breath. "Don't ever do that again." "Someone had to." "Not you." "Why not me?" She yanked off her frozen gloves. "Because I'm from the city? Because I'm small? Because I'm—" He kissed her. It was fast and hard and desperate, more collision than kiss, and it shocked Evelyn into complete silence. When he pulled back, his hands were shaking. "Because I can't lose anyone else," he said quietly. "I can't. Do you understand?" Evelyn stared at him. Behind them, the children had gone completely still. Even Daniel had stopped moving. "I understand," she said finally. He nodded once and turned away, busying himself with building up the fire again while the children slowly came back to life around them. Evelyn stood there dripping melted snow onto the floor and trying to process what had just happened. Clara appeared at her elbow with a towel. "You should change before you catch cold." "Right, yes." Upstairs in her room, Evelyn peeled off the wet layers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Not from cold now, from something else. Something she hadn't felt since Thomas died and hadn't expected to feel again. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. Her lips were chapped. Her hair was a mess. Her face was red from the cold and the wind and probably looked terrible. Boone had kissed her anyway. The storm broke the next morning. Not all at once, but gradually, the wind dying down and the snow easing until it was possible to see the barn again. Possible to see anything. Boone went out first to check on the animals. He came back an hour later looking grim. "We lost 3 cattle," he said. "Found them frozen in the north pasture. Must have gotten separated before we got everything into the barn." "I'm sorry. Could have been worse. Should have been worse, probably." He looked at her. "We got lucky." Maybe they had. Or maybe luck had nothing to do with it, and it was just preparation and stubbornness and refusing to give up. The children burst out of the house like prisoners released from jail, whooping and throwing snowballs and generally making chaos. Evelyn watched them from the porch, wrapped in one of Boone's coats because hers was still wet. He came to stand beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "About yesterday," he said finally. "We don't have to talk about it." "Yes, we do." He turned to face her. "I can't offer you romance, Evelyn. Can't offer you easy. Can barely offer you comfortable. But I can offer you this, a partnership, a real one. Someone to share the load with. Is that what you want?" "I think it's what we both need." He paused. "And maybe wanting comes later, if we're lucky." Evelyn thought about Thomas, about the life she'd lost, about the advertisements she'd answered in desperation, not hope, about stepping off the train in Blackstone Ridge expecting nothing and finding this, a hard place with hard people and harder winters. "Partnership," she said. "I can work with that." He held out his hand. She took it. His palm was calloused and rough and warm. They stood there on the porch holding hands like awkward teenagers while the children played in the snow and the ranch slowly came back to life around them. It wasn't romance, wasn't love, but it was real, and it was theirs, and maybe that was enough. 2 weeks after the blizzard, Boone disappeared. Not disappeared in the vanished without a trace way, but in the way ranchers sometimes did, riding out before dawn to check fence lines in the northern pasture and not coming back when he should have. By mid-afternoon, Clara was pacing the kitchen. By sunset, she was climbing the walls. "Something's wrong," she said for the 10th time. "He probably just got delayed," Evelyn said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Maybe a fence needed more repair than he thought. Pa would have sent someone back to let us know. Maybe he couldn't spare. "You don't understand," Clara's voice went sharp. "He's never late. Not like this. Not without word." The ranch hands came in for supper without him. They ate quickly, eyes darting toward the door, then headed back out to the barn without their usual talk. Even they were worried, Evelyn could tell. They just weren't saying it out loud. By nightfall, when the temperature dropped below freezing and Boone still hadn't returned, Clara made a decision. "I'm going after him." "Absolutely not," Evelyn said. "He could be hurt, could be thrown from his horse or trapped or he could be fine, and you could get yourself killed in the dark looking for him. I know this ranch better than anyone. I can—" "Clara!" Evelyn grabbed the girl's shoulders. "Listen to me. Your father would never forgive himself if something happened to you, and your brothers and sisters need you here. They need him more. Then I'll go." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've been here 2 months. You don't know the ranch. You don't know the terrain. You'll get lost before you make it half a mile. Then you'll come with me. Show me where to go." "That's insane." "Probably." Evelyn was already moving toward the door, grabbing coats. "But it's less insane than you going alone, or me going alone, or both of us sitting here doing nothing." She expected Clara to argue more. Instead, the girl just stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Get the heavy coats, the ones Pa uses for winter riding, and blankets. As many as we can carry." They told Maggie they were checking the near pastures, which was technically true even if it wasn't the whole truth. They told the ranch hands to keep the children inside and the fires going. Then they saddled 2 horses, Boone's big gelding for Evelyn and Clara's smaller mare, and rode out into the darkness. The moon was almost full, which helped. The snow reflected what little light there was, turning the landscape into something ghostly and strange. Evelyn had never ridden at night before. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made her jump. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "North pasture first. That's where he said he'd be." Clara urged her horse faster. "Then the ridgeline if we don't find him there. And if we don't find him on the ridge?" Clara didn't answer. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. The cold sank into Evelyn's bones despite the heavy coat. Her face went numb. Her fingers ached even inside gloves. This was different from the storm, different from the trip to the elderberry bushes. This was deliberate exposure to conditions that could kill them, and they both knew it. The fence line appeared ahead, a dark line against white snow. Clara pulled up her horse and stood in the stirrups, scanning. "There," she said suddenly, pointing. Evelyn followed her gaze. Maybe 50 yards away, something dark lay in the snow, not moving. They rode hard, covering the distance in seconds. Clara was off her horse before it fully stopped, running toward the shape, and Evelyn's stomach clenched because she knew what they'd find before they found it. Boone lay crumpled at the base of a ravine, his horse standing nearby looking confused. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see the unnatural angle of his leg. "Pa!" Clara skidded to her knees beside him. "Pa, can you hear me?" He groaned, which meant he was alive. That was something. Evelyn dismounted more carefully, grabbing the blankets. Up close, Boone looked terrible. His face was gray, his lips tinged blue. Blood had soaked through his pant leg on the right side. When Evelyn knelt to check his leg, he grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he gasped. "It's broken. I can feel it. I need to see how bad. It's bad enough that I've been lying here since noon trying not to pass out. 6 hours. He'd been out here for 6 hours in below-freezing temperatures with a broken leg. The fact that he was still conscious was either miraculous or stubborn, probably both. "What happened?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. "Horse spooked. Something in the bushes. Threw me straight into the ravine." He tried to sit up and went white. "Think I hit my head too." Evelyn pulled off her gloves and started checking him over properly. The leg was definitely broken. She could see the swelling even through his pants. There was a gash on his forehead that had bled and then frozen. His hands were so cold they were almost blue. "We need to get you back to the house," she said. "Can't ride like this." "Then we'll figure something else out." "Evelyn," he grabbed her hand. "Listen to me. You need to go back, get help, bring the wagon, and that'll take hours. You'll freeze to death before we get back. Better than all three of us freezing out here." Clara made a noise that might have been a sob or might have been anger. "I'm not leaving you." "Clara, I watched Ma die," she said fiercely. "I sat there and watched her die and couldn't do anything about it. I'm not doing that again. I'm not." Boone looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted. Resignation, maybe? Or just acceptance that arguing with two stubborn women in the middle of the night while bleeding and hypothermic was a losing battle. "The old mining shelter," he said finally. "Quarter-mile east of here. Could get to it if I had help." "Can you stand?" Evelyn asked. "I can try." It took all three of them and both horses to get Boone upright. He leaned heavily on Evelyn and Clara, his face going white as paper when his broken leg moved. Evelyn could hear him grinding his teeth against the pain. "Where's this shelter?" she asked. Clara pointed. "That way." "But Pa, I don't know if we can get you that far." "We can," Evelyn said, "because the alternative is unacceptable." They half dragged, half carried him. Boone tried to walk, but mostly just tried not to scream. His broken leg dragged uselessly, leaving a trail in the snow. Every few yards they had to stop because he was about to pass out, or because they needed to rest, or because the pain was too much. The shelter was little more than a hole in the side of a hill with some rotting timbers holding up the entrance. But it was shelter, which was more than they had out in the open. Claire and Evelyn got Boone inside and laid him down as gently as they could. He was shaking now. Full-body tremors that meant shock was setting in, or hypothermia, or both. Evelyn covered him with every blanket they had and tried to remember everything she'd ever heard about treating broken bones. "We need fire," she said. "There's nothing to burn." "Then we use body heat." Clara stared at her. "What?" "It's how people survive cold. Shared body heat. You and I lie down on either side of him, and we share what warmth we have." Evelyn was already moving, positioning herself next to Boone. "Come on." Clara hesitated only a moment before lying down on Boone's other side. They pressed close, wrapping blankets around all three of them, trying to create a pocket of warmth in the freezing shelter. Boone's breathing was shallow and ragged. His skin felt like ice. Evelyn pressed her hands against his chest, trying to share what little warmth she had, and prayed to no one in particular that it would be enough. "Tell me about the mining shelter," she said, mostly to keep Clara focused on something other than panic. "How did you know it was here?" "Ma showed me, years ago. She said every rancher should know where the shelters are. in case you get caught out in weather. Clara's voice was thick. Said they'd saved more lives than anyone knew about. Smart woman. She was. They lay there in the dark, 3 bodies pressed together against the cold, while the wind howled outside. Evelyn kept talking about Boston, about her mother's kitchen, about anything and everything that might keep Clara's mind occupied. The girl responded in fragments, her answers getting slower as exhaustion set in. Boone drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he'd wake with a gasp, confused about where he was. Sometimes he'd mutter things that didn't make sense. Once he called out for Sarah, his voice breaking on her name, and Clara started crying silently beside him. He's going to be okay, Evelyn said, willing it to be true. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. The night stretched on forever. Evelyn dozed in short bursts, waking every time Boone moved or made a sound. Her body ached from the cold and the position and the sheer tension of keeping vigil, but she didn't move, didn't let go. Sometime before dawn, she felt Boone's hand find hers under the blankets. His fingers were still cold, but not as cold as before. He squeezed once, weakly. Still here? He whispered. Still here. Told you to go back. I'm not good at following orders. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. Noticed that about you. Rest, Evelyn said. Save your strength. For what? For getting back to the ranch, for healing, for arguing with me later about whether this was a good idea. Wasn't a good idea. Probably not. But we did it anyway. His hand tightened on hers. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. But when dawn finally came, gray and cold and unwelcome, they were all still alive. That had to count for something. Clara stirred first, groaning as she tried to sit up. How is he? Evelyn checked Boone's pulse, his breathing, the color of his skin. Still not good, but better than it had been. He needs a doctor, needs that leg set properly. I'll go back to the ranch, get the wagon and help. Can you make it alone? Clara looked at her like she'd said something offensive. I'm not the one from the city. Fair point. Go. Be careful. The girl slipped out of the shelter, and Evelyn heard her horse leaving at a gallop moments later. Then it was just her and Boone in the dim shelter, wrapped in blankets that smelled like horses and old fear. You shouldn't have come, Boone said. His eyes were open now, clearer than they'd been in the night. Clara shouldn't have come alone. Could have sent the ranch hands. Could have. Didn't. Evelyn shifted to check his leg. The swelling had gotten worse overnight. This is going to hurt when we move you. Already hurts. It's going to hurt worse. He closed his eyes. Story of my life lately. They didn't talk much after that. Evelyn rationed out the water they'd brought, gave Boone small sips when he'd take them. She checked the wound on his head, which had stopped bleeding but looked ugly. She tried to keep him warm and awake and alive until help arrived. It took Clara 3 hours to get back with the wagon and 2 ranch hands. By then, the sun was fully up, and Evelyn was so cold she could barely feel her own feet. They loaded Boone into the wagon as carefully as they could, but he still screamed when they moved his leg. The ride back to the ranch was torture. Every bump in the road made Boone gasp or curse, or sometimes both. Evelyn sat beside him in the wagon bed, trying to cushion his head, trying to keep him still. Clara drove like she was racing death itself, which maybe she was. The children poured out of the house when they pulled up. Daniel started crying immediately. Ruth grabbed onto Maggie and wouldn't let go. The twins just stared, their faces white. Get him inside, Evelyn ordered. Careful with that leg. They got him into the downstairs bedroom, the one that had been his and Sarah's, the one no one used anymore. Evelyn sent Samuel riding into town for the doctor, knowing it would take hours but hoping the man would actually come this time. Then she started doing what she could with what she had. She cut away Boone's pant leg and nearly threw up at what she saw. The bone wasn't protruding, thank everything, but the break was bad. The leg was swollen to twice its normal size, discolored purple and black. She'd never set a bone before. Had no idea if she could do it without making things worse. You're staring, Boone said through gritted teeth. I'm thinking. Think faster. I've never done this before. First time for everything. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked at him. He was in agony, shaking with pain and cold and probably infection starting to set in. But he was trusting her anyway, trusting her to do what needed doing even though she had no business doing it. "I need something to brace it with," she said, "something straight and strong." Clara appeared with pieces of wood from the kindling pile. "Will these work?" "They'll have to." Evelyn washed her hands until they were raw, tore strips of cloth for binding, positioned the wood on either side of Boone's leg. Then she looked at Clara and the ranch hands who'd crowded into the doorway. "Hold him down," she said. "Don't let him move no matter what." They did. Boone's shoulders, his arms, his good leg, all pinned. Evelyn put her hands on his broken leg and pulled. The sound he made wasn't quite human. The children in the other room started crying, but Evelyn didn't stop. She pulled and felt the bone shift, felt it try to align, felt Boone go rigid with pain. "Almost," she gasped. "Almost there." One more pull and something clicked into place. Not perfect, not even close to perfect, but better than it had been. She bound the leg tight with the wood splints, wrapping cloth around and around until it was as stable as she could make it. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking and Boone had passed out, which was probably a mercy. Clara stood against the wall, her face wet with tears. He's alive. The rest we'll know when the doctor gets here." The doctor arrived 4 hours later, a grizzled old man who smelled like whiskey and looked like he'd seen everything twice. He examined Boone's leg with rough efficiency, then looked at Evelyn. "Who set this?" "I did." "You a nurse?" "No." "Huh." He prodded the splint. "Not bad for someone who doesn't know what they're doing. Might have saved his leg, actually. Another few hours and infection would have made the whole thing useless." Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen. "He'll keep the leg?" "If he's lucky. If he does what I tell him. If infection doesn't set in." The doctor started rebinding the splint with proper materials. "He'll be laid up for months. Can't put weight on it, can't ride, can barely walk once it starts healing." "I understand. Do you?" The doctor looked at her hard. "Because running a ranch with the owner laid up is no small thing. You'll be managing everything. The hands, the livestock, the children, all of it. On top of nursing him back to health. I can handle it." "Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. But you better figure it out fast because winter's not done with us yet." He left instructions and medicine and a bill that made Evelyn's stomach hurt. She paid it with money from the household fund and tried not to think about how little was left. That night, with Boone sleeping fitfully in the downstairs bedroom and the children finally settled in their rooms, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and let herself fall apart. Just for a minute. Just long enough to shake and cry and feel every bit of fear she'd been holding back for the past day and night. Then she pulled herself together, wiped her eyes, and started making lists. What needed doing tomorrow? What needed doing the day after? How to keep the ranch running with Boone out of commission? How to keep 6 children fed and warm and safe? How to keep everything from collapsing? The list was long. Probably too long for one person. But she was going to try anyway. Clara found her there an hour later, still writing. The girl sat down across from her without speaking for a long moment. "You saved his life," Clara said finally. "We saved his life. You're the one who knew where the shelter was. You're the one who made us go looking in the first place." Clara's voice cracked. "You're the one who wouldn't give up. Your father's stubborn, had to match that energy." Clara laughed, but it turned into a sob halfway through. "I was so scared. When I saw him lying there, I thought, I know. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known what to do, but I was there, and we did what we had to do, and he's alive." Evelyn reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "That's what matters." Clara held on tight. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being awful to you, for trying to make you leave, for—" She stopped, struggling. "For being so angry that you weren't my mother, that I couldn't see you were trying to be something just as important." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You have every right to miss your mother, but I don't have the right to punish you for not being her." Clara wiped her eyes. "You're not her. You'll never be her. But you're you, and that's good. That's enough." They sat there holding hands across the kitchen table while the house settled around them. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft and steady. Another storm, another challenge, Another chance to prove they could survive. But for now, for this moment, everyone was safe. Everyone was home. And that was enough. The ranch hands looked at Evelyn like she'd lost her mind when she told them what needed doing. "Ma'am," the oldest one said. His name was Charlie, she'd learned. "With all due respect, you can't run cattle operations in December. Not with the boss laid up. Not with weather like this." "I'm not asking if we can," Evelyn said. "I'm telling you what needs to happen." They were standing in the barn, breath steaming in the cold air. Boone had been bedridden for a week now, and in that week Evelyn had learned more about ranching than she'd ever wanted to know. Most of it was bad news. The cattle needed moving to lower pasture before the next storm hit. 2 sections of fence were down. The well pump was acting up, and they were running low on feed. "The boss usually handles," Charlie started. "The boss can't walk, so I'm handling it." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Now are you going to help me, or do I need to figure this out myself?" Charlie exchanged glances with the other 2 hands. Then he sighed. "What do you need?" What she needed was a miracle, but she'd settle for competent help. They spent the next hour going over what had to be done and in what order. Charlie knew his job. She'd give him that. He just wasn't used to taking orders from a woman, particularly one who looked like a strong wind might blow her over. But he took them anyway. By the end of the week, they'd moved the cattle, patched the fences, and fixed the pump. Evelyn spent her days running between the barn and the house, between managing the ranch and managing 6 children and managing Boone, who was turning out to be the worst patient she'd ever encountered. "I should be out there," he said for the 100th time, trying to sit up in bed. "You should be lying down before you tear something," Evelyn said, pushing him back down with more force than necessary. The herd is fine. Charlie and I moved them yesterday." He stared at her. "You moved the herd?" "Yes." "You don't know how to move a herd." "I didn't. Charlie taught me. Turns out if you ask people to explain things instead of assuming you know everything, they'll help you." She adjusted his pillows roughly. "Novel concept." "Evelyn, you're welcome, by the way, for keeping your ranch running while you're laid up being difficult." He grabbed her wrist before she could walk away. Not hard, just enough to stop her. "I know what you're doing, and I know it's not easy." "Nothing about this is easy." "I'm sorry." She looked down at him. He'd lost weight in the past week, his face thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper. The leg was healing, slowly, but the forced inactivity was eating him alive from the inside. "You can make it up to me by following the doctor's orders," she said, "and by not dying of stubbornness." "That a real medical condition?" "It should be. You'd be the first documented case." He almost smiled. Almost. Then his expression shifted into something more serious. "If we don't make it through winter, if the ranch fails, I want you to know it's not your fault. We're going to make it through winter." "Evelyn, we're going to make it," she said firmly, "because failure is not an option. Not for me. Not anymore." She left before he could argue. The truth was, she didn't know if they'd make it. The money was running out faster than she'd expected. The supplies were low, and winter had barely started. But admitting doubt would be admitting defeat, and Evelyn had come too far to let defeat win now. That night, she sat at the kitchen table doing math that didn't want to work out right. No matter how she added it, they were short. Short on money, short on supplies, short on time before the next storm hit. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Mrs. Patterson standing on the porch holding a basket. "Evening, Mrs. Crow. Hope I'm not disturbing." "Not at all. Please, come in." Mrs. Patterson stepped inside, looking around the kitchen with that same assessing gaze she'd used the first time. "Heard about Boone's accident. Heard you've been running the ranch yourself." "Not myself. I have help." "Still, that's no small thing." She set the basket on the table. "Brought you some things, extra flour, some preserved fruit, a ham. Figured you could use it." Evelyn stared at the basket. It was more food than she'd seen in one place since arriving in Blackstone Ridge. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" Because charity—" "This isn't charity," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "This is neighbors helping neighbors. Big difference." "We can't pay you back right now." "Didn't ask you to." She pushed the basket closer. "You saved Daniel's life. You pulled Boone out of that ravine before he froze to death. You've kept that ranch running through weather that would break most men. You think a few pounds of flour is too much to give someone like that?" Evelyn's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the quilting circle. We all pitched in. Mrs. Patterson moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Hendricks wanted me to tell you that James lost his bet. You made it past Christmas. He's not happy about it. After she left, Evelyn unpacked the basket slowly. Flour, sugar, coffee, preserved peaches, a whole ham, dried beans, even some candy for the children. It wouldn't solve all their problems, but it would get them through another month at least. She sat back down at the table and recalculated. The numbers still didn't look great, but they looked better, survivable. Maybe that was enough. December turned into January. The days were short and brutally cold, but they managed. Evelyn learned to read weather signs from Charlie, learned which cattle needed extra feed and which ones were hardy enough to make it on their own, learned how to negotiate with the hands who sometimes questioned her authority just because she wore skirts. The children adapted. Clara took over more of the household management, and she was good at it, organized, efficient, just like her mother had probably been. Maggie helped with cooking. The twins managed the chickens and gathered eggs. Even little Daniel had his jobs, carrying wood for the stove and keeping the fire going. They were becoming a unit. Not a perfect one. Ruth still had nightmares. Samuel still fought with his twin sister over nothing. Daniel still cried when he was tired. But they were functional. They were surviving. And Boone was healing. By late January, he could put weight on his leg with a crutch. By early February, he could walk short distances without it. By mid-February, he could make it to the barn, though Evelyn still caught him wincing when he thought no one was looking. You're pushing too hard, she told him one morning, finding him trying to muck out a stall. I'm fine. You're limping. I'm always limping now. That's what happens when you break a bone at my age. She took the shovel from his hands. Go inside. Rest. I'm tired of resting. Then sit on the porch and watch other people work. But you're not doing this. Not yet. He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he just nodded and headed back toward the house, moving slower than he probably wanted her to notice. Charlie appeared at her elbow. He's getting better. He's getting stubborn. Same thing with him. The old hand leaned on his own shovel. Can I ask you something, ma'am? Of course. You plan on staying after he's healed, after winter's done? Evelyn thought about it. Thought about the advertisement that had brought her here. About stepping off that train expecting nothing. About every hard day and cold night and moment of doubt she'd had since arriving. Yes, she said. I'm staying. Good. Ranch needs you. Kids need you. He paused. Boss needs you, even if he's too stubborn to say it. The thaw came in March, earlier than expected. The snow melted slowly, revealing brown grass and broken branches and all the damage winter had hidden. But it also revealed green shoots starting to push through the ground. Signs of life returning. Evelyn planted herbs near the kitchen door, the same ones her mother had kept. Yarrow and mint and chamomile. Things that grew hardy and useful and survived hard conditions. Clara helped, kneeling in the mud without complaint, and together they turned the small plot into something that might actually thrive. Ma tried to keep a garden, Clara said, patting dirt around a seedling, but she was never good at it. Too many other things needing attention. We'll see if I'm any better. You will be. You're good at things that seem impossible. Evelyn looked at the girl. No, the young woman. Clara had grown in the past months, not just taller, but steadier, more sure of herself, less angry at the world. You've been a huge help, Evelyn said. I couldn't have managed without you. Yes, you could have. You managed Daniel's fever, you managed the blizzard, you managed Pa's accident and the ranch and everything else. Clara sat back on her heels. You manage impossible things. That's just who you are. I'm just someone who refuses to give up. Yeah, that's what I said. April brought rain instead of snow, which meant mud everywhere, but also meant they'd made it through winter. Actually made it, all of them alive, and the ranch still standing. The women from the quilting circle threw a spring gathering at the church. Not a formal celebration, just neighbors getting together after months of being trapped in their separate homes. Evelyn went with Clara and Maggie, leaving the younger children with Boone, who was mobile enough now to handle them for a few hours. The gathering was loud and chaotic and wonderful. Children ran wild while the women caught up on gossip, and the men gathered outside to smoke and complain about weather. Evelyn found herself pulled into conversations, included in plans, treated like she'd been there for years instead of months. "You made it," Elizabeth Morris said, appearing at her elbow with a cup of punch. "Through your first Wyoming winter. That's no small achievement." "Barely made it." "Barely counts," Elizabeth raised her cup. "To surviving." "To surviving," Evelyn echoed. Later, Mrs. Hendricks pulled her aside. "Heard you've been helping the Jacobson family, sending food over when you had extra." Evelyn tensed. She had been helping them, quietly, using supplies from her own dwindling stores. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone because she knew what the town thought about the Jacobsons and their bad decisions. "They needed help," she said simply. That they did, and most people here were content to let them fail for their mistakes. Mrs. Hendricks smiled. "But not you. You helped anyway." "Someone had to." See, that's the difference between surviving and living. Surviving is looking after yourself. Living is looking after each other too. She patted Evelyn's arm. "You're teaching us something, Mrs. Crow, whether you mean to or not." On the way home, Clara was quiet in the wagon beside her. Finally, she said, "You never told us you were helping the Jacobsons. Didn't seem important. Pa would have said it was foolish, that we couldn't afford to help others when we were barely making it ourselves. Your father has his opinions. I have mine." "What is your opinion?" Evelyn thought about it, choosing her words carefully. "I think the world is hard enough without us making it harder on each other. I think sometimes the difference between someone making it and someone failing is whether anyone gave them a chance. And I think—" She paused. "I think I survived this winter because people helped me. The quilting circle bringing supplies. You teaching me about the ranch. Charlie showing me how to manage the cattle. Your father trusting me even when he probably shouldn't have. All of it was help. So helping the Jacobsons felt like paying that forward." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Ma would have liked you." "You think?" "Yeah, she used to say the same kind of things." May came warm and green. The cattle moved to high pasture. The children shed their heavy coats and ran wild like animals released from cages. The ranch came back to life in ways that had nothing to do with seasons and everything to do with people who'd survived something hard together. Boone could ride again by then, though he still favored his good leg getting into the saddle. He and Evelyn rode out one evening to check the herd, moving slowly through grass that was finally growing thick and green. "You did good," he said suddenly. "With the ranch, with the kids, with everything. We did good. All of us." "No." He stopped his horse and looked at her directly. "You did good. I was laid up being useless and you kept everything from falling apart. That's not nothing. You would have done the same." "Maybe, but I didn't have to, because you were here." He urged his horse closer to hers. "I need to tell you something." Evelyn waited. "When Sarah died, I thought I was done. Done with life, done with hope, done with everything except making sure the kids survived. I answered that advertisement because I needed help, not because I wanted a partner, not because I thought I'd ever—" He stopped, struggling with words. "What I'm saying is, you were supposed to be practical, a solution to a problem, but you became something else entirely." "What did I become?" "Home," he said simply. "You became home." Evelyn's eyes stung. "Boone, I love you," he said, the words coming out rough and unpracticed, like he'd forgotten how to say them and had to relearn. "I know we started this as business. I know I was cold and you were desperate and neither of us was looking for love. But I love you anyway, and I hope, you might feel the same." She thought about Thomas, about the love she'd had and lost, about stepping off that train in Blackstone Ridge expecting nothing and finding this instead. It wasn't the same kind of love. It was harder, built on survival and necessity rather than romance. But it was real, maybe more real because of it. "I love you too," she said, "though you're still the most difficult patient I've ever had." He laughed, actually laughed, and it was the best sound she'd heard in months. Then he leaned over from his horse and kissed her, clumsy and off balance and perfect. When they rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting gold over the mountains. The house stood solid against the sky, smoke rising from the chimney. Through the windows, Evelyn could see the children moving around inside, hear their voices carrying across the yard. This was what she'd built. Not just survival, not just existence, but something that looked like a life. They got married properly in June, in the small church with the whole town watching. Evelyn wore a simple dress that Clara had helped her make. Boone wore his Sunday suit and only limped a little. The children sat in the front row looking proud and nervous and happy. After, there was a gathering at the ranch. People brought food and music and stayed until the stars came out. Evelyn watched them all from the porch. Neighbors who'd become friends, children who'd become family, a man who'd become her partner in every sense that mattered. Mrs. Patterson found her there. "You proved us all wrong, you know. Every single one of us. I proved myself wrong too. I didn't think I could do this. But you did. And now look." She gestured at the ranch, at the people gathered, at everything Evelyn had built. "You didn't just survive the frontier, you made it yours." After everyone left, Evelyn walked through the quiet house. The kitchen where she'd learned to make bread, the bedroom where she'd nursed Daniel through fever, the barn where she'd learned to manage cattle. Every corner held a memory of struggle and survival, but also of victory. Boone found her in the kitchen, standing by the window looking out at the dark mountains. "Tired?" he asked. "Exhausted. Happy. Both." He came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Any regrets? About answering that advertisement? About coming here?" Evelyn thought about everything she'd lost, Thomas, her old life, the comfort of city living, but she also thought about everything she'd gained, these children, this man, this place that had tested her and broken her and rebuilt her into something stronger. "No regrets," she said. "This is where I needed to be, even when I didn't know it." They stood there together while the ranch settled into sleep around them. Outside, the wind moved through the grass. The cattle lowed in the distance. The mountains stood silent and eternal against the night sky. Evelyn had come to Blackstone Ridge with nothing but a carpet bag and a cookbook and a letter promising a new life. She'd found something better than promises. She'd found purpose, found family, found herself. The frontier hadn't broken her. It had revealed who she'd always been underneath the grief and loss, someone who could stand in the face of impossible odds and refuse to back down, someone who could turn a house into a home, someone who could take 6 strangers and make them family, someone who belonged. Clara appeared in the doorway, holding sleeping Daniel in her arms. "I'm taking him up to bed. Ruth's already asleep. The twins are pretending to be asleep." "I'll check on them in a minute," Evelyn said. After Clara left, Boone turned to face Evelyn properly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For fighting. For not giving up on us when you probably should have. Where else would I go?" She smiled. "This is home now. For better or worse. Mostly better, some worse. But we handle it." "Yes," Evelyn said. "We handle it." And they would. Whatever came next, hard winters or difficult seasons or challenges they couldn't predict, they'd handle it together. Because that's what families did. What homes were built on. Not perfection, but persistence. Not ease, but effort. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train in October, scared and desperate and alone. She barely recognized her now. That woman had been running from her past. This woman was building a future. "Come on," Boone said, taking her hand. "Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Tomorrow's always busy. Then we better rest while we can." They walked upstairs together, through the house that had stopped being strange months ago, past the children's rooms where soft breathing marked peaceful sleep, into their own room where moonlight fell across the floor in silver squares. Evelyn changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed beside her husband. Her husband. The word still felt new and foreign and right all at once. "Evelyn," Boone said in the darkness. "Yes?" "I'm glad you came." "So am I." She fell asleep listening to his breathing, to the house settling around them, to the sound of life continuing. And when she woke the next morning to sunlight and children's voices and the smell of coffee someone else had made for once, she understood something fundamental. She hadn't just survived Wyoming. She'd claimed it, made it hers, turned a desperate answer to an advertisement into something real and solid and permanent. The harsh places in the world didn't break everyone. Sometimes they made space for people who were already broken to become whole again. Sometimes they revealed strength that had been hiding under grief and loss. Sometimes they offered not escape, but transformation. Evelyn Crow had come to Blackstone Ridge looking for survival. She'd found a life instead, and as she headed downstairs to start another day on the ranch, surrounded by children and chaos and the endless work that came with frontier living, she knew one truth absolutely. She was exactly where she was meant to be.